Today, we will talk about one of the greatest rulers of ancient Egypt, Queen Hatshepsut. To begin her story, we must travel back to the 19th century, between 1828 and 1829, to the French scholar Jean-François Champollion, the man who deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs for the first time in history. Before Champollion's breakthrough, our knowledge of the ancient pharaohs was limited. After it, an entirely new world of history was revealed. During one of his journeys through the temples of Egypt, Champollion was reading inscriptions that no one else could understand. While exploring the west bank of Luxor, he came across a magnificent temple, partially carved into the cliffs and partially buried beneath the sands of the desert. As he studied the inscriptions covering its walls, he discovered that they told the story of a great pharaoh, a ruler bearing all the royal titles of ancient Egypt. King of Upper and Lower Egypt, son of Ammonius, and many others. Everything about the inscriptions pointed to a powerful and successful ruler. But as Champollion continued reading, he noticed something unusual. The texts repeatedly referred to this ruler using feminine language. Instead of His Majesty, the inscriptions spoke of Her Majesty. The great pharaoh described on these walls was not a man. It was a woman. That woman was Hatshepsut, the remarkable ruler whose story we will explore in this video. Hatshepsut, whose name means foremost of noble ladies, was far more than an ordinary queen. She ruled Egypt for approximately 20 years and became the first woman to wear the full crown and regalia of a pharaoh. She was also the first woman to lead one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. But how did Hatshepsut achieve such an extraordinary position? In a society dominated by men, and despite the presence of royal princes who could claim the throne, she used her intelligence, political skill, and determination to become the sole ruler of Egypt. To understand her rise to power, we must first look at the world before Hatshepsut. At that time, Egypt was passing through one of the darkest periods in its history. The Hyksos, foreign rulers from Asia, had occupied much of the country. For the ancient Egyptians, this was a painful and humiliating experience. It was the first time in their history that Egypt had been ruled by foreigners. The ancient Egyptians, the very idea was unbearable. How could foreigners rule their land? It was the first time such a thing had ever happened. In this story, we will hear about great kings and courageous warriors who gave their lives on the battlefield while resisting the Hyksos occupation. The center of this resistance was Thebes, modern-day Luxor, and behind it stood a remarkable generation of powerful royal women who carried the kingdom on their shoulders. Among them was Queen Tetisheri, one of the strongest and most influential women of her time. She inspired the spirit of resistance in her children and grandchildren and helped keep alive the dream of a free Egypt. Her daughter, Queen Ahotep, also played a crucial role. Her husband, King Seqenenretau, and her son, King Kamose, both died fighting against the Hyksos. After their deaths, Ahotep became regent of Egypt until her young son, Ahmose, was old enough to rule. When Ahmose came of age, he proved himself to be one of Egypt's greatest military leaders. He successfully drove the Hyksos out of the Nile Delta, reunified Egypt, and laid the foundations of one of the most powerful dynasties in Egyptian history. After Ahmose came his son, King Amenhotep I, who ruled Egypt for nearly 20 years. Throughout his reign, he was strongly supported by his mother, Queen Ahmose Nefertari. She was far more than a queen and the mother of a king. She held enormous influence within the government and became one of the most powerful women in the kingdom. In many ways, her position could be compared to that of a modern prime minister. The reason for mentioning these women is simple. Long before Hatshepsut, Egypt had already been shaped by extraordinary queens. After them came a king with even greater ambitions. He dreamed not only of ruling Egypt but of building a vast empire. That king was Thutmose I. He married Queen Ahmose, and together they had a daughter, Hatshepsut. Thutmose I loved his daughter deeply and saw something special in her. He recognized her intelligence, confidence, and strong character. Whenever he traveled on important royal ceremonies through the Delta to present himself before the gods, the nobles, and the people, he often chose to take Hatshepsut with him rather than his sons. He wanted her standing by his side. Determined to build a great Egyptian empire, Thutmose I crushed rebellions in Nubia and then marched north into the Levant. His campaigns pushed farther and farther until he reached the Euphrates River. The ancient Egyptians called the Euphrates the river of reversed waters because, unlike the Nile, it flowed in the opposite direction. With every victory, Thutmose expanded Egypt's influence and power. Grand celebrations were held to display Egypt's military strength and to warn rival rulers against rebellion. Following these military victories, Thutmose I turned his attention to domestic affairs, particularly construction and architecture. He is remembered as the first pharaoh to build his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, choosing a remote location to protect it from tomb robbers. Despite his many successes, however, Thutmose I faced a serious personal tragedy. One by one, he lost his sons from his great royal wife, the queen whose lineage was considered fully royal. As a result, there was no longer a direct heir with unquestioned royal blood to inherit the throne. Only one potential successor remained, Thutmose II. He was the son of Thutmose I, but his mother was not of royal birth. In ancient Egypt, royal lineage was an extremely important matter. A claimant's legitimacy often depended on being born to both a royal father and a royal mother. The Egyptians were determined to preserve the royal bloodline and took this principle very seriously. To maintain the dynasty, marriages between close royal relatives were often arranged in order to keep the royal bloodline intact. For this reason, the court saw only one solution. Hatshepsut, whose royal lineage was unquestionable, would marry her half-brother Thutmose II. Through this marriage, Thutmose II would gain greater legitimacy as pharaoh, while Hatshepsut, as a princess of pure royal descent, would help preserve the continuity of the royal dynasty. With no fully legitimate royal heir remaining, only one possible successor was left, Thutmose II, the son of Thutmose I by a secondary wife who was not of royal birth. In ancient Egypt, royal lineage was of enormous importance. A ruler's legitimacy depended heavily on his connection to the royal bloodline. If a prince was not born to both a royal father and a royal mother, his claim to the throne could be challenged. The Egyptians were extremely strict about preserving the royal dynasty. To maintain the purity and continuity of the royal bloodline, marriages between close royal relatives were often arranged. As a result, the royal court saw only one solution: Hatshepsut would marry her half-brother, Thutmose II. Because Hatshepsut was born to the great royal wife and possessed an unquestionable royal lineage, her marriage would strengthen Thutmose II's legitimacy and allow him to become pharaoh. Hatshepsut, meanwhile, became the great royal wife, a title that carried far more significance than simply being the king's spouse. It was a position with considerable political and religious influence. The great royal wife played a vital role in preserving the royal bloodline and producing the next heir to the throne. Hatshepsut also inherited one of the most prestigious titles in Egypt, God's wife of Ammonius. This office granted her access to wealth, land, temples, and immense religious authority. Yet despite their royal status, the marriage between Hatshepsut and Thutmose II was far from happy. Their relationship was strained, and tensions within the royal court continued to grow. Hatshepsut believed she was the more rightful heir. Not only was her royal lineage stronger, but she also possessed the intelligence, leadership, and political skill that she felt her husband lacked. However, one obstacle stood in her way. She was a woman. This reality fueled divisions within the royal court. Powerful figures and members of the priesthood began to align themselves with different factions. Some supported Thutmose II, while others believed Hatshepsut was better suited to rule. As tensions increased, the palace became a center of political rivalry and intrigue. Because Hatshepsut's marriage to Thutmose II was filled with tension and political rivalry, the couple had only one child, a daughter. This created a familiar problem once again: the absence of a clear royal heir born from both a king and a queen of royal blood. Thutmose II did have a son, but the boy was born to a secondary wife named Iset, who was not of royal birth. That child was Thutmose III. The situation became even more complicated when Thutmose II died at around the age of 30. Now, the only remaining heir was the young Thutmose III. However, his royal lineage was considered weaker, and more importantly, he was only about 4 years old, far too young to rule a powerful empire like Egypt. Faced with this challenge, the royal court agreed that Hatshepsut would serve as regent until Thutmose III came of age. Official decrees and royal inscriptions began to display Hatshepsut's name alongside that of the young king, reflecting her role in governing the kingdom. But Hatshepsut was an ambitious woman. She possessed intelligence, experience, and a strong desire for power. She had no intention of remaining in the shadows forever while others ruled in her name. The question is, what happened next? How did Hatshepsut manage to seize full control of Egypt despite the existence of an heir to the throne? And how did she become one of the most powerful and successful rulers in the history of the Egyptian empire? That is exactly what we will discover in part 2 of the story of Hatshepsut. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join us for the next chapter of this remarkable story.